Hello, good afternoon. The United States has accused China of intimidating its neighbours by continuing a military build-up in the South China Sea. James Mattis, the Defence Secretary, said China was using its military might to coerce other countries in the region to accept its ownership of the disputed waters. He was speaking at a security summit in Singapore. President Trump is due to meet with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un there in 10 days' time. From Singapore, Karishma Vaswamy has just sent this report.
The U.S. is here to stay in Asia. That's the message U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis had for his Asian counterparts in Singapore today. But he also warned of China's increasing influence.
China's militarization of artificial features in the South China Sea includes the deployment of anti-ship missiles, surface-to-air missiles, electronic jammers, and more recently, the landing of bomber aircraft at Woody Island. Despite China's claims to the contrary, the placement of these weapon systems is tied directly to military use for the purposes of intimidation and coercion.
China says it owns all of the South China Sea, a lucrative and strategic shipping zone, even though 6 other countries lay claim to it. It's been building military installations in the area, and critics say Beijing has silenced condemnation of its actions, either by paying off its Asian allies or by bullying them. Allegations China denies.
在南海岛礁驻军和
It's within China's sovereignty to deploy troops and weapons on islands and reefs in the South China Sea, and it's allowed by international law. Anyone who makes carping comments on this is trying to interfere in China's internal affairs. It's not worthy of refuting.
But while the U.S. is keen to assert its leadership in Asia, President Trump's America First policies are sometimes incompatible with those goals. Here in Singapore, security is being stepped up because in just 10 days' time, this city plays host to the summit of the century, the meeting between President Trump and North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un. The U.S. has said it's committed to denuclearization and that pulling U.S. troops out of this region isn't on the table. America is positioning itself as a force to be reckoned with in Asia and a superpower its Asian allies should stick to. Karishma Vaswamy, BBC News, Singapore.
The United States has vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for protection for Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, following the deaths of more than 100 people during recent violent protests there. The US ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said it was because the resolution failed to mention Hamas, which Israel views as a terrorist organisation. Britain abstained in the vote. Northern Rail has admitted the introduction of its emergency timetable next week will lead to the cancellation of several hundred trains each week. It follows the failure to fully implement a new timetable which was introduced 2 weeks ago. Well, our correspondent Olivia Richwald is at Wakefield Station in West Yorkshire now. Olivia.
165 trains cancelled every day across the Northern Rail network, starting on Monday and running to the end of July. That's the new emergency timetable that's been brought in to bring to an end 2 weeks of chaos following the introduction of new timetables. Yesterday there were 350 trains cancelled across the Northern Rail network, which was one of the worst affected operators. Well, today I've spoken to a spokesman for the operator, and they say here in Wakefield, here in Yorkshire, it is actually an improving picture. Things are getting back to normal, but there are still major problems in Greater Manchester, especially in Manchester and Blackpool. That's where drivers haven't yet been trained on the new timetables, which is causing all of these problems. Well, Northern Rail has apologised again and promised it will deliver improvements, but it may take some time. Meanwhile, the Houses of Parliament are poised to debate this whole debacle next week.
Olivia Richwald, thanks very much. A 43-year-old man has been charged in connection with the attempted murder of 2 police officers yesterday. Constables Kenny Mackenzie and Laura Sayers were stabbed as they attended a routine visit at a house in Greenock. They're due to be discharged from hospital later today. Visa says its debit and credit card operations are working normally again, following problems in the UK and elsewhere in Europe yesterday. Visa says it's now operating at full capacity after a hardware failure. It's apologised to customers and says it fell well short of its goals. Google is reported to be pulling out of a contract to do artificial intelligence work for the US Defense Department, following opposition within the technology giant's own workforce. Some employees resigned and thousands of others signed a protest petition saying it was the first step towards using artificial intelligence for lethal purposes. Google's work is said to have involved helping the military to identify people from drone footage. The BBC has learned that an investigation into the attempted murder of Norman Scott is to be reopened, as police concede they may have wrongly concluded that Andrew Newton, a hitman allegedly hired to kill him, was dead. Scott was an ex-lover of the former Liberal Party leader Jeremy Thorpe at a time when homosexuality was still illegal. The story has been brought to life in the BBC One drama A Very English Scandal, which concludes tomorrow evening. John Donnison reports.
Where's the head boy?
Jeremy Thorpe, charming, ambitious and powerful, was at the heart of one of the biggest political scandals of the 20th century. In an Old Bailey trial, the married Liberal Party leader was accused but acquitted of masterminding a plot to kill his former lover, Norman Scott.
He's the love of my life.
Oh, you're ridiculous.
A current BBC drama starring Hugh Grant as Thorpe has renewed interest in the case.
Safe journey, Peter, and I wish you a happy life. And then I wish Norman Scott to be killed.
But what is fiction and what is fact? This weekend, a new BBC documentary will make fresh revelations. It's based on a panorama film made at the time of the trial in 1979, which has never been broadcast until now.
It couldn't be shown because we had evidence of Jeremy Thorpe's guilt, and of course he was found not guilty. So the documentary couldn't be shown, and furthermore I was ordered to destroy it by the Director General of the BBC. I declined that offer. I kept it as a tape. I converted it to disc. My dog tried to eat the disc, but I still managed to save it, and that's what's running tomorrow night.
The documentary will look at the role of Andrew Newton, portrayed here in the BBC drama. He's the man who has admitted shooting Norman Scott's dog.
Your turn.
Before his gun jammed as he tried to shoot Scott. Newton said he had to do it. In 2015, Gwent police began looking into the case again after fresh claims that Newton could prove there was a cover-up. But officers stopped when they concluded Newton was dead. Now, though, Gwent police have told the BBC Andrew Newton might still be alive and are trying to trace him. Norman Scott, now in his late 70s, has welcomed the news.
I don't think anybody's tried hard enough to look for him. I really don't. There must be people who knew him, and there would surely be record of him dying. Surely.
Jeremy Thorpe died 4 years ago, but the case continues to fascinate, intrigue, and the hunt for the truth continues. John Donnison, BBC News.
And you can see Tom Mangold's documentary, The Jeremy Thorpe Scandal, on BBC4 tomorrow night at 10. Now, with all the sport, let's say good afternoon to John Watson at the BBC Sports Centre. John, thank you very much. And that's it from us. The next news on BBC One is at 10 to 6. Have a good afternoon.